Hi, welcome to the MacIver Report. I'm Bill Osmulski, Content Director for the MacIver Institute. This is our weekly podcast where we talk about all the great content that we have produced at the MacIver Institute over the past week. We are producing so much great quality stuff these days, we can't even get to it all in this podcast. So we're going to be focusing in on a couple topics, mostly on the state budget, because that budget debate has just kicked off officially this week. I'm joined, as always, by my colleague,
Mike Lucas, policy analyst,
and chief economist.
Yes, chief.
I know
should start reiterating that.
You're too humble. Mike went to Hillsdale. He is an economist. He's been contributing great things to MacIver since he came on board about a year ago now. So, all right, well, let's dive right into this. So it is February 21st. It's Friday, and it is officially budget season. This is where MacIver really shines, every 2 years. Nobody picks apart the state budget like we do at MacIver. We've got this year we're doing things a little bit differently. Hopefully it'll be a big improvement for everybody. We've got our big overview story. That's where you'll see this logo. We're going to try to keep this story posted near the top of our website continuously, so you'll be able to refer back to it. It's got all the basic information you need to know about the budget, and it's expressed in layman's terms. So, we realize that our audience aren't all lawmakers and bureaucrats, so it's written for normal people, so you can kind of understand what the budget is, how the budget debate progresses, and some of the big themes that you'll be hearing lawmakers scream about over the next several months. And at the top of that story, you'll always see where we're at in the budget debate, what our last step was, and what the next step is. So, last step, what kicked this thing off this week? Governor Evers gave his executive budget proposal on Tuesday, and the legislature immediately introduced it as Senate Bill 45. So what's going on now? Well, now for the next couple weeks, the Legislative Fiscal Bureau is going to be, and the Joint Committee on Finance to a lesser degree, are going to be poring over the governor's budgets, trying to really analyze it. And then after that, the Joint Committee on Finance, which is mostly in charge of the budget, putting together the budget, they'll start inviting select agency heads and secretaries to come to a hearing to provide testimony about their agencies, what they need in the budget, what they're trying to accomplish. So, our budget coverage this week, and going from most recent to oldest here, just posted this story today. Governor Evers' budget includes over $7 billion in higher taxes, fees, and local taxing authority. So the budget document is hundreds of pages long, and eventually Legislative Fiscal Bureau will give us a very thorough analysis of how much, where all the spending is hidden. The budget it gets very complicated because you're talking about a massive document. This budget is going to spend probably going to spend over $100 billion. It stretches for 2 years. You've got taxes in there. You've got fees in there. You've got local taxing authority. Now, it's kind of like playing three-card Monte. And politicians are always playing tricks on this. They'll say, so Governor Evers is out there saying that he wants to cut taxes by $2 billion in this budget. Well, we look into that claim. We check the actual numbers. We see, okay, you're cutting this amount of taxes here. Where are you raising taxes in other places? Where, and fees are not counted as taxes. So taxes are income taxes and excise taxes. So he's raising those in certain places. He's cutting them in other places. And then, he's not counting the fees. And the fees are, hunting licenses, driver's licenses. Those don't count as taxes, even though he wants to increase the cost of those. And then on top of that, local governments have no inherent taxing authority on their own. All local taxes, those are authorized by the state government. So he wants to increase sales taxes at the city. The city currently doesn't have sales taxes. He wants there to be city sales taxes, and he wants to increase the county sales taxes. So that's a sizable chunk of change that would
Yeah.
directly impact us at the local level. We've got a quick story about Representative Bourne. He is the Assembly co-chair of the Joint Finance Committee. Says Evers' budget numbers are shocking. Wisconsin's next state budget likely to spend $50 billion or more. That's just the state portion. When we talk about, we'll get into that a little bit here, but there's two ways to look at the state budget. You have all funds, which is all the money the state brings in, whether it's from local sources like, or state sources like, the income tax and the excise taxes, federal funds, segregated funds, which sometimes that involves transfers from the general fund and the federal funds. And then you got program revenue, which includes all your hunting licenses and driver's licenses. Politicians like to shift things around, so you got to look at the total spending. You got to look at the actual just general spending. So when we say that the budget's going to be $50 billion, we're just talking about the GPR there. And then the MacIver News Minute from earlier this week was about Wisconsin's $860 million structural deficit. Everyone's talking about our $4 billion budget surplus. To explain that quickly, that is what the state expects to have in its bank account, the general fund, in June of this year. Now, if you take what we're currently collecting in taxes and compare that to what we're spending versus what the agencies say we need to spend over the next 2 years, you end up with this $860 million deficit at the end of the next 2 years. That's a problem that Governor Evers should have been addressing, but he did not, because this is what Governor Evers wants to spend. So this is every state budget. They're all 2 years long, or they all go for 2 years for a biennium. For the past 20 years. So we almost hit $100 billion last time, and Governor Evers wants to take us to 120.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So Mike, I cover this. I've been covering this stuff for years. I really get into it. I understand, the games that these guys play.
Yeah.
This is your first budget cycle.
Yes, it is.
And you had to post all these stories because, I've dumped off all the actual content posting onto you and proofreading. So
yeah. So let me ask you this. So the left-hand column all the way up to 2024-25, those are all the finalized budgets, right?
Yeah, that was what was passed into law.
Okay, and then the 26-27 is what Evers wants.
That's right. So as we're building this slide through the debates, next we'll put down probably what the Joint Finance Committee eventually approves, and then what eventually becomes law.
Yeah, well, just eyeballing it, it seems that since 2018-2019, the increase in all funds has been rising or increasing faster and faster. Mm-hmm. Looks like from 2010 to 2017, it stayed pretty steady. But asking for 120, given that last time was 100, is that's pie in the sky. I really don't know what he's expecting. That's crazy. There's no precedent for that amount of money being signed off on by the legislature.
All right, so here's my theory. When I was sitting there on the floor recording his budget speech, I'm trying to keep track of all these numbers, and I'm just joking to the people, the reporters around me. This is Evers' gazillion-dollar budget.
Yeah.
It's $100 million for this and $200 million for that, and I'm cutting billions in taxes, and I'm giving all this extra money to these programs. I'm thinking, where is this money coming from? I can't wait to see these numbers. But this is not this. What usually happens, and this is Governor Evers' fourth budget proposal. The Republican-led legislature always just throws it in the trash.
Yes.
And even though so the way that the process works is the governor, presents his budget proposal. He gives the legislature a bill, and the legislature will introduce that bill. So that is a starting point. That is Senate Bill 45. Governor Evers' people wrote it. He handed it off to the Senate. They put their name on it, and they introduced it that same night.
Yeah.
However, at the same time, all the Republicans are saying, yeah, this thing's dead on arrival. We're throwing this right in the trash.
Yeah.
So they might not really talk about it very much, which is why we're talking about it, because there's a lot of things in here that need to be addressed. My point is Governor Evers would never have given a budget like this. He would to a Democrat-led legislature. This was a political calculation. He expected this budget to be thrown away right away. And that's part of the reason why he decided, I'm going to make it a $120 billion budget. Governor Evers might as well have made it a $200 billion budget.
Yeah.
Because he knew that he was betting on the legislature not entertaining this thing, not talking about it, just taking it from them and depositing it right in the trash can. So now he can go around the state, and, there's something in there for every constituency you can imagine.
Right.
So you can go to the school and say, hey, I wanted to give you guys another, gazillion dollars for schools, and those mean Republicans wouldn't do it. You could go to, the middle class, you could run the kitchen table ads. Hey, I wanted to cut your taxes by all this. The Republicans wouldn't do it. So for the next year and a half, as, I suspect he's running for re-election. This is a re-election budget, especially knowing that he could promise the moon and stars and not have to worry about paying for it. Right. I mean, so this sets him up for his next political campaign.
Yeah. So, what do you think he's actually going to get? So, starting in 2018 to 2020, the all funds increases by $7 billion, and then it increases by $6 billion, then $10 billion.
Yeah.
Is he going to get a $6 billion spending hike? I mean, how much further can we go here? We're not exactly in a good spot as a state, economy wise.
No,
the entire country has been stagnant for the last 2 years.
Well, you see, that's where it becomes important to talk about things like these structural deficits. I mean, because everyone's like, "Oh, we're doing so awesome in Wisconsin. We got a $4 billion budget surplus." Look, you only maintain that surplus if you maintain fiscal responsibility, and we are not really keen to do that.
No, and the surplus isn't due to fiscal responsibility.
Yeah, you're right.
The surplus comes from the feds.
Yeah, so we offset a lot of funds.
Money.
Yeah, so it wound up in the general fund, and a lot of that, I mean, you offset things, and that's why the budget gets to be like it's a cat and mouse game, where I'm going to cut taxes here. Okay, well, where are you raising taxes then to pay for those taxes? So, and so like the feds, they give you more money, and we saw this in all these school districts. Feds, flooded us with money, and that offsets other tax revenue.
Yeah.
So and you're right. So that's how you wound up with this huge budget surplus, in the general fund, even though that wasn't general fund revenue.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how much higher can you go? Well, we do incremental budgeting in this state. We've talked about that before. So every budget, the starting point is the last budget. So when the Joint Committee on Finance starts this budget debate, they aren't going to be looking at, they don't start at zero, which would be zero-based budgeting. They don't do performance-based budgeting where it's, what do agencies actually need? They start at, we are spending $99.3 billion in the last budget, so that's what we're starting. That is a starting point for the 26-27 budget.
Yeah.
So that's a shame, but that's why it always goes up. One thing to keep in mind here, why did it go down? Did it go down? No, it just barely increased in the 2012 to 2013 fiscal years. That's because we had that bad recession back in 2008. That was the Great Recession. The state keeps spending more money. Everybody's losing their jobs, stretching those budgets, but state keeps getting more and more money. Act 10 went into play, but even the state got into trouble. The state was broke. It was, we were looking at laying off like 1,500 state employees and cutting services, and it was a mess. And so that's why you saw it kind of level off in 2012.
Yeah, and then big picture here, in the span of 20 years, 2004 to 2024, State spending is doubled.
Yep.
Doubled. It's like 99%, but it's doubled.
Yeah, so, and it just keeps going up. So let's look at the next one here. So Governor Evers, in his State of the State address, he was talking about how, all these balanced budgets that he's proposed. I put this chart together to demonstrate Governor Evers has never proposed a balanced budget. That first bar that is higher than all the other bars, that is Governor Evers' proposed level of spending for each fiscal year for his entire time as governor. The second bar, which is much lower than that, that is what the state expected to collect that fiscal year when they were doing the planning process during the budget. And that third line is what the state actually brought in over the course of that fiscal year. So you can see there's some years here where we really underestimated what we were going to bring in. Economy was doing, better than expected at least.
And also, 2021, 22, 23 don't count. Mm-hmm. Because that's all the COVID money.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what boosted that general fund.
That's not Evers being, pretty close to the mark.
Yeah.
No, that's him being consistently off the mark and then getting what amounts to a $9 billion windfall over the span of 3 years from the feds.
And even with that, you could see that his bar is still always higher.
Still over that, too, yeah.
So, it's required by law that we have a balanced budget in this state. So how do you fill that gap? It's obviously, this is deficit spending. You're spending more than you're bringing in. So you fill that gap by increasing borrowing or dipping into the reserve accounts. And then there's other tricks that you do too. But those are the two easiest ones that are, they're probably the least controversial. Because then the other thing you start talking about is like moving things between accounts, offsetting funds in segregated accounts, pushing payments into a new fiscal year so they don't show up on this fiscal year. And there's a lot of really shady things that you could do to balance a state budget.
Yeah.
All right, this one is important because this is what the governor issued out Tuesday night. This was part of his budget in brief. This is his. This is the general fund. So this isn't that $120 billion all fund number. This is what that $50 billion general budget, general purpose revenue budget looks like. So this is essentially his income statement, and it includes. There's three numbers that I want to draw your attention to. The first one I did not highlight, but it's about 3 lines down under revenues and transfers. You see taxes. So you can see that the state is on track to collect $22.3 billion in taxes this year. Under Evers' budget, that will go up to 24.5 next year, then 24.6 the year after that. So one way to look at this, and you've probably been hearing the number, Evers wants to increase taxes by $2.5 billion. One way to look at this is you take the end of the next budget and taxes are at 24.6 and you subtract what they're currently at, which is 22.3. That's one way to do it. So you'd say, hey, the net increase in taxes is $2.5 billion.
Yeah.
One of the things you got to watch out for with this is, as Governor Evers is talking about things like cutting taxes, it's like he says, I cut taxes by $2 billion. That's not a net amount. What he means there is, he's adding up both years. So if he's hypothetically, in his mind, he's cutting taxes by $1 billion the first year and $1 billion the second year, so that's $2 billion. So that's kind of like some of the cat and mouse games I'm talking about when it comes to looking at these budgets. So anyway, by the end of next fiscal year, see very down at the bottom, I highlighted negative $1.6 billion. That is a structural deficit. That is, you take all the money the state's bringing in versus all the money that the state wants to spend, and that is where we would end up at the end of this budget. Now, the number right above that, the $500 million, well, that's what would actually be in the state's bank accounts, at least, under this scenario. And that's because, well, he's borrowing money, he's taking money out of the general fund, out of the rainy day fund to pay for this. So he's, dipping into the savings account for this budget.
Yeah.
That's it. That we've got a $4 billion. We got $4 billion in the savings account now. By the end of the next 2 years, if Evers got his way, it'd be down to $500 million.
Yeah. So looking at that line that says net balance June 30th, the second to last one. So the first number, that 4.1, that's what's in the bank right now.
Yep.
And then by the end of the next fiscal year, it'll be drawn down to 2.1 billion. So he's going to take $2 billion out of that $4 billion surplus.
That's right.
And then by the next year, fiscal year 27, that surplus is going to be down to $500 million.
Exactly. So you see the structural balance, or the structural deficit gets bigger and bigger because that's what he's overspending each year. And then you see by the end of, 4 years from now, our bank account is overdrawn by $4 billion.
Yeah, so it's going to be completely it's going to be the opposite. We're going to go from a $4.1 billion surplus to being $4 billion in the hole.
Yes, and that's a real deficit. That's not, you aren't plugging that up. That's what you're ending up with after all your.
So so this $4 billion surplus that Evers has been touting as a sign of his, great leadership and the frugality of his administration, all this fiscal responsibility that just permeates throughout the bureaucratic beast that is the Wisconsin state government, is going to be eviscerated and evaporate almost completely within 2 years.
Yeah.
And will be the exact opposite in 4.
Yeah, because he's using that to just set higher spending levels.
That doesn't indicate to me frugality.
No.
I don't know about you.
That is a, Wisconsin German value, too. That. So there's another part of this budget of Evers' budget document that I want to draw people's attention to. It's on page 150. So, this is like a 200-page document, so I know it's hard to find some of this stuff. But this is revenue enhancement measures. So when I look, going back real quick, when I look at this and I see, I said you got to add up, the tax difference from next year to this year and from 2 years from now to this year. So the net is about $2.5 billion increase in taxes, but this is a 2-year budget, so you got to add those two numbers up. So you're at about $4.5 billion taxes altogether increase. And so then you got to look at this. Okay, so where's that $4.5 billion coming from? Some of it is going to be from natural growth in the economy, not all of it. And then also you've got to look at that top where I show total reductions. I cut it off a little bit so you can actually see this page. But above that line, he's got all the things he wants to cut, all the taxes he wants to cut. So total reduction. This actually comes out to, about 4 plus 5 is $900 million total tax cuts. So he's saying $2 billion, but it's really $900 million in his plan. So, it's, playing these games. So $900 million plus, the $4.5 billion tax increase. Some of that's going to be made up by growth in the economy. But at the bottom here, you see, okay, these are the revenue raisers. This is where he wants to directly increase taxes.
Okay.
He wants to create a new tax rate for people who make over $1 million. He wants to update the Internal Revenue Code just to bring it in line with the federal code. Well, this one, sends off alarm bells in my head. It's like, wait a minute, that's $500 million. Where's, How do you get that just by updating the code? Whose pocket is that coming out of?
Yeah.
He wants to cut the manufacturing. He wants to increase. So you got to look at this the right way. So he wants to limit the manufacturing credit, and that's going to bring in an additional $800 million. Okay, that means he's raising taxes on factories and manufacturers.
Yes.
You got capital gains in here. If I were running for office in, say, the city of Milwaukee, and as a Republican, chance in hell, right? Hey, those little cigarettes, those cigarellos that guys are smoking on corners, that would be in all my ads. Evers wants to increase your taxes on these little cigarellos by $5 million. So anyway, this is all the ways that he wants to increase taxes. So you take those total revenue enhancements, 1.7 the first year, 1.6 the second year. So that is $3.3 billion in increased taxes. So that's part of that $4.5 billion increase.
Yeah, and and coming mostly from those, overwhelmingly from those top four: the capital gains, the 9.8% rate for millionaires, update to the Internal Revenue Code, and then that manufacturing credit. Okay.
Yeah, and we talk about this in the I talk about this in that article about Evers' taxes, fees, and local revenue raisers would increase be over $7 billion. This is all explained in there, but just to highlight that 9.8% rate for $1 million filers. I mean, you could get the raw numbers from DOR, which I did, and you see we've got, what did I say? It was like 9,000 people in the state that make over $1 million a year or something like that.
I actually don't remember.
Yeah.
So I can't help you with that.
Anyway, it's in there. I went through the numbers, and what I calculated was, if you were to take what was paid in taxes by people that make over $1 million, last year, the most recent DOR numbers, and you take 9.8% of their incomes over $1 million, this should be pulling in $1 billion a year, just in a static scenario. So instead, Evers expects to bring in $700 million the first year and less than $600 million the second year.
Yeah.
So all right, what Mike?
Why? What would explain that change?
Yeah.
Okay, you start taxing people who earn incomes greater than $1 million. You're not going to get whatever you think you're going to get. You're not going to get whatever you think you're going to get from anyone else, but least of all from people earning incomes greater than $1 million. You're talking about taxing people who have the means to avoid taxation better than any other group of people. Mm-hmm. So what does this look like to me? That looks like $200 million worth of fleeing millionaires.
That's right.
Just moving across the border, going down to Iowa or Minnesota or
so you're losing half of that income.
Yeah.
Over the course of 2 years.
And of course, even if people don't leave, they'll just find other ways to avoid it. So, for example, instead of receiving compensation in the form of salary as a CEO of some business, you'll just say, okay, well, pay me in stocks.
Yeah.
Now I don't have to pay an income tax, or get me a new company car every 6 months. Mm-hmm. Because a new car could be, $80,000, $90,000. You get one of those, nice new shiny GMCs, a fancy Yukon or a crab walking electric Hummer or something like that. So people will just opt for those things and avoid the tax.
I find it amusing too that even Governor Evers, acknowledges that if I start taxing millionaires are going to start fleeing the states.
Yeah.
He might not say it out loud, but his balance sheet says it for him.
Yeah, or at the very least, his accountants recognize that. Yeah. People who actually made this budget.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Governor Evers wasn't sitting there with his banker's lamp and.
He said, I'm a teacher and I want more money for schools.
Okay, Governor, we'll give it to you. All right, so we were really railing on Governor last week and the week before because of his State of the State address, and this is the year of the kid.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share this one soundbite from Governor Evers' budget address here. So,
our workforce and economy can't afford more parents leaving their jobs because they can't afford child care.
All right. We can't afford parents not being able to work because they can't put their kids in child care.
Yeah. Didn't he say not too long ago that 70% of household income goes towards daycare?
Yeah, he was repeating that too.
Right.
It would cost you 2/3 of your income to put your kids in daycare. So
I'm not a math whiz, but I think that's actually an economic improvement.
Yeah.
If a parent drops out of the workforce to raise a kid, they're actually better off. They actually have more resources at their disposal and are therefore more able to spend or to invest or in whatever it may be.
An alternative economic theory here.
Yeah.
So just to reiterate what Governor Evers said is, our state economy cannot afford to have stay-at-home parents.
No.
That's what he's really saying there. And this goes in, I mean, I kind of went at length last time, but I mean, this is the overriding, Governor Evers' overriding policy is.
Yeah.
He wants the government to raise your kids. He wants you to work to support the government's efforts to raise your kids. He doesn't want you to have anything to do with your kids. He wants the government to feed them, to watch them, to raise them. He wants you to be in the workforce, making lots of money so you can pay lots of taxes.
Yeah. And even if what he was saying was true, which is it's not, if he's going to say that 70% of a household income goes towards daycare expenses, if he's going to say that, he's thinking in the short term. He's not thinking in the long term. One of the most valid or one of the best predictors of lifetime earnings for kids, right, is whether you have two parents in the home. As soon as you lose a parent, you got one parent in the home, your prospects for reaching the middle class or going to college and all these other things, which are proxies for well-being, just evaporate.
Yeah.
So thinking long-term, you have a parent drop out of the workforce to stay at home and raise kids. Okay, no longer is 70% of your income going towards daycare, but now you actually can invest in what we call in economics human capital. Mm-hmm. Kids actually have more interaction with parents, which is an extremely valuable investment to making kids and in your long-term economy, right? Because they're being equipped with language skills, they're being equipped with social skills, they're hopefully
values
reading
and work ethic
reading books and doing chores around the house and learning what it means to run a household and how you contribute and things like that. And those just cause massive increases in economic growth and standard of living. So wrong on two counts.
Well, and last time we were railing too about the party girl mom, single mom who couldn't make her kids sandwiches.
How could I forget?
Yeah, so I mean, she had, like we said, she had those two teenage boys, who couldn't figure out how to make themselves a sandwich. So yeah, I mean, what are their lifetime earning potential?
Right.
Given that they would rather eat a moldy freezer burnt burger than learn how to make a sandwich.
Right.
So all right. Moving on to the legislature. Legislature's in session. Assembly was on the floor on Wednesday. And they had a bunch of these education-type bills. And just to highlight three of them, one was banning cell phones in the classroom. Another was limiting superintendent's salary, tying it to like teachers' raises or micromanaging, how much school districts can pay superintendents, essentially.
Yeah.
Another one was requiring schools to teach cursive. I had a question. These are all things that a local school board could also determine.
Yeah, they could do this themselves.
Yeah, so, so why is the state coming down on this? So I asked at the press conference before I asked, and here was the answer.
While I'm a huge supporter of local control, there are some districts that are so broken and expect us to have to pay for it as taxpayers, either on the front end through funding the school district or on the back end with the bad decisions that are made where people make bad choices, end up in prison, all those other things. So I think having that statewide standard is good for Wisconsin. While still maintaining the flexibility to try to get there, we need to make sure that we all have the same place to end up at.
Yeah, so my takeaway is the more money, we're giving too much, the state is giving too much money to schools.
Yes.
And so the more money that you get from the state, the more the state is going to be invested in you and have more interest in you achieving certain results. So they're going to have more motivation to micromanage you. Mm-hmm. So if all the money for schools came from local sources, which I feel the majority of them should, then the state would have a lot less ground to stand on when they want schools to do things.
Yeah.
So
there's just bad incentives mixed up here.
Yeah.
This shared revenue going to schools, in order to keep down property taxes, we're taxing your income and giving it to the schools who would have raised taxes on you more, and we're just subsidizing bad decision making at the local level.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about a lot of that, throughout the budget debate, how, so much of what the state government does is just redistribute income around the states. You pay so much in property tax to keep your city government going, to keep your county government going, to keep your school district going. And then all those leaders and all those at all those levels are always saying, we need more aid from the state. Where do you think the state is getting its money from? It's getting its money from your income and sales taxes. So you are paying for all that aid that is coming back to your cities, counties, and school districts.
Yes, from your right to your left.
From your right to your left. So, but in addition to them just giving your own money back to you, they're also giving all kinds of mandates, like your school has to teach cursive because we think it's a good idea.
Right. And how about we mandate that they teach English? Priorities.
Well, it's
sorry, folks. I understand that the older folks listening to this really want kids to write cursive. Sorry, it is obsolete.
They can't. Well, I see that's like, well, that's a nice to have.
It's
skill.
a nice to have. You should know how to sign your name. You should be able to, do a signature.
But
really, this isn't going to improve the learning outcomes of kids that they know how to write cursive.
No, and 2/3 of the kids in the state can't read or write as it is. So it's
Right.
like, okay, now let's throw cursive at them. But again, that's why this should be a local decision.
Right. Yeah.
So, but and this also, we talked about, performance-based budgeting a while ago too, where it's like, you don't just throw programs out there and hopefully this literacy program will fix things, or hopefully this cursive program will fix things. It's just like you're just throwing ideas against the wall trying to see what's going to stick. Mm-hmm. You need to have specified goals and objectives, and then programs that tie in and support those objectives and goals. This isn't how you run an organization.
And consequences for not meeting those goals.
Yeah, that's the other thing. So now we're getting into
none of these schools ever lose funding.
No, and this is a legitimate debate. When you're doing performance-based budgeting and you have certain efforts that are not achieving the metrics and the standards that you've laid out, what do? Do you reassign? Do you reappropriate those resources to other operations, or do you give them more money? So Governor Evers is out there saying, "Hey, schools aren't cutting it because you aren't giving them enough money."
Right.
Whereas, on the other side, you've got say me, who would say, schools aren't cutting it. No matter how much we give them, we need to reassign these resources.
Right.
Those are two legitimate positions in a productive debate on what do we do about schools. It's not, let's throw all this money at all these other programs and see what sticks.
Yeah. And a lot of people have said this, but Milton Friedman comes to mind. When it comes to government, if an agency or a department really excels at, achieving their mission and reaching their goals, then they're rewarded with more funding. But if they fail to achieve their goals, then they come out and say, well, the problem was actually much worse than we originally thought, and they get more funding.
Yeah, yeah, that's the challenge with performance-based budgeting. All right, so moving on from the budget and the legislature, just wanted to talk about, give a little plug for another video that we put up this week, the Act 10 story. It's been 14 years since we enacted Act 10 in this state. It was a game changer. It turned everything around. State was broke. Public workers were getting laid off left and right. We're facing potential for massive tax increases, massive layoffs. It wasn't working anymore. That was what the budget repair bill was all about. And every year MacIver calculates how much Act 10 has saved Wisconsin taxpayers over the past 13, 14 years now in taxes and saving services, because when you can't raise taxes anymore, you start cutting services. So we try to account for both those things. Act 10, the big thing with Act 10 was it took the union boot off of our necks in this state at all levels of government. The unions are still trying to get that back. This is an issue in the state Supreme Court race. This is, constant litigation, constant debate.
Yeah.
So this video, it's about 13 minutes long. It goes through the reason why we needed Act 10, the rationale as Act 10 was being implemented, the insurrection at the Wisconsin State Capitol that tried to intimidate lawmakers not to pass Act 10, and then everything that's happened since then. So definitely encourage people to check this out on our website. It's on Facebook, on YouTube. Really trying to spread it around because, this is 14 years. That's a generation, essentially. Yeah. So, a lot of people, that are involved in politics, public policy these days, they were little kids when that happened, 2011.
Yeah.
So.
And I got to say, Bill, this was really good because I'm a transplant from Florida, and then before that Michigan, and before that California. So, this isn't a story that, has any significance to me, but this is really high quality. He did a really good job, like production-wise, like it looks excellent, and it really does a very good job of filling people in who don't really understand what Act 10 was about, like myself.
Good crash course.
Yeah, after watching this, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it.
Well,
really good job with this.
Thanks. Yeah, I just, real quick, I was working at MacIver back then. Mm-hmm. I was there every single day.
Yeah.
I know this story because, I've lived it. I was a reporter before Act 10. I came to MacIver. They introduced the budget repair bill. The unions, waged an insurrection to try to stop it. And, I was in that Capitol every day during it. So.
Yeah, great video.
Thank you very much. So I think that's going to do it this week for the MacIver report. Again, our budget is in full swing now, so we will be bringing you more updates on that next week. We talked a lot about electricity and monopolies last week.
Yep.
That's kind of been promoting that throughout the week, but we'll have more stuff with that next week as well. So until then, hope everyone enjoys their weekend. For the MacIver Institute, for the MacIver Report, I am Bill Osmulski, and I was joined by Mike Lucas. So have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.